Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Stein. On behalf of the Harvard Law School Project on Disability and our friends and collaborators at the Petrie Flom Center, I'm very honored and delighted to welcome you to a talk by Professor Tom Shakespeare. Tom is a professor of disability studies at the University of East Anglia and also teaches bioethics at the University of Norwich's medical school. He's one of the most intrepid, curious, intellectually honest, and rigorous thinkers in disability studies, bioethics, theory, healthcare, and we're really honored to have him. He's someone from whom I always learn and whose company I always enjoy, and is just a spectacular speaker, as you will see. So please join me in thanking and welcoming Professor Tom Shakespeare.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's a great honor to be back at Harvard and to be speaking to you this morning. I'm hoping and guessing that you might come from different areas of this great institution. I will assume nothing. I will assume no law. I know no law, unless clinical expertise. But I hope to give you an overview. For those of you who are already expert and far beyond me on this journey of understanding, please forgive me for making it too simple. So I want to talk about disability and selective termination of pregnancy to start with, just to outline where I stand or sit on this. I'm sure many of you will disagree with me, and maybe we can come back to that at the end. Then I want to introduce non-invasive prenatal diagnosis, because I think it does force us to revisit old questions and think harder about what we took for granted. And so I want to really describe and present an issue rather than offer you an argument that resolves the issue. And I hope very much to leave a few minutes at the end for you to challenge me. So I support a woman's right to choose, as do many, many disability rights activists. And for us, this has always presented a problem. If we support a woman's right to choose, for example, termination of pregnancy on social grounds, how can we at the same time say, express our concern when she doesn't want to continue a pregnancy affected by disability? And there's a lot of print and speech from disability rights activists trying to nuance this point. People have said, my good friend, late departed, respected colleague Adrian Ash, has said, look, there's a difference between saying you don't want to be pregnant and saying you don't want to be pregnant with this particular fetus. And some people have said, look, we support women's right to choose not to be pregnant, but we do not support selective termination on the basis of the characteristics of the fetus. For me, this argument is not robust. It seems to me that if we consider the situation of a young woman who finds herself pregnant, her choice and her decision as to whether to continue pregnancy is influenced by whether the pregnancy is of a disabled fetus or not. She might think, as a single parent, as a young woman, she'll find a creche, she'll find support, she'll find babysitters for an average fetus, for an average baby. She'll be able to survive. It'll be tough, it'll be difficult, but she'll pull through. And then she thinks of the additional strains, stresses, and demands when you have a baby affected by disability. The fact that there are fewer creches, fewer friends willing to babysit. So the question for her is always, do I want to be pregnant with this particular fetus? So I find the disability rights argument against this not very sound. There's also arguments about the fact that it's discriminatory. Now, you can only discriminate, and as I understand it, and you're the lawyers, against persons. So if it's discriminatory to choose against a disabled fetus, that is endowing the fetus with the status of personhood, in which case the entire enterprise determination falls. It cannot proceed. Finally, Adrienne and others have used an expressivist argument. They've said, look, the problem with selective termination is that it communicates, it expresses a devaluing of lives affected by disability. It renders us second-class and inferior in the eyes of the polity and of the society. And I'm not sure that's the case. I am perfectly happy to accept that some people know me like me, respect me, but don't want to have a child like me. And if we do support a woman's right to choose, that is her choice. And I think that she can still be my friend, she can still welcome me, but she can say, look, Tom's life has been more difficult than it need be. His parents have required more resources than I am prepared to commit to the project of personhood. And therefore, I support and uphold the rights and the value of Tom Shakespeare, but I don't want to have a baby like him. And I think that may cause me some psychological confusion, but it does not insult me. I should not be so identified with my form of life that I cannot comprehend why somebody else would wish to avoid a form of life like mine. So I find those arguments, selective arguments, not very robust. I do think, I'm a gradualist, and I do think that there are issues about late termination. I believe that a fetus develops personhood and rights through pregnancy. And in the British situation, you can have a termination up to 24 weeks on various grounds, including the impairment status of the fetus. But after 24 weeks, that is what we deem viability, you cannot have a termination unless the life of the mother is in danger or the fetus is affected by severe handicap, not otherwise specified. And under those grounds, there are terminations after 24 weeks, maybe 100 a year. And those are troubling to many people. Where the fetus is unviable, has no chance of life, that maybe seems acceptable. But where the fetus has Down syndrome or something like that, it seems a wrong way to go. So we know that, I think I can assert that morally and psychologically late termination is more problematic for us. So just to reiterate my position, I support a woman's right to choose. I think we need a health system and a social system which supports women and men to have tests, which supports women and men to have terminations, but also supports their right not to have tests, not to have terminations. I do not believe that there is a moral duty either way. I think it's an intensely private, ethical, psychological, maybe even theological issue. I think it's Rainer Rapp, the distinguished anthropologist, who said of amniocentesis that this technology makes every woman into a bioethicist. And so it does. And I would add, and they're menfolk too. This is a profoundly troubling choice that people have. We should support them to have the test or not to have the test, have the termination, not to have the termination. And this involves full and balanced information about what the lives of disabled people are like. I have a G to A transposition at 0.38 in my FGFR3 gene. And Michael could have introduced me as such. And it would have meant nothing to the vast majority of you who are not geneticists. It says nothing about me. But he's told you I'm a professor, I have some reputation of social research and theoretical speculation. You know a little bit more about me. But you need to know that I have a partner, I have 2 children, I have a nice house, I support Newcastle United Football Club, which is perhaps a reason for termination. But those are all my social cultural features. And we need to know what lives of people with disabilities are like, what they can achieve on average, what the good and the bad, how the range is. And we need to support this lady and her partner in finding out or not finding out, in testing, in not testing, in terminating, in not testing, terminating. And we need to say that if you continue this pregnancy, we will support you. We are an advanced society with the resources to support people with disabilities. We will welcome all babies into this world. So you will not be making a decision to continue based on the fact that this society discriminates against disabled people. So we're going to do everything in our power to ensure that if you have this baby, you will be supported, your baby will flourish, and have as good a chance as any other baby of progressing in this world. But if you choose not to do that, we will not hold that against you in any way, shape, or form. That is your private decision. So people have said, well, look, this is eugenic. And we can spend the rest of the hour talking about what eugenics is. But the reason that I do not think it's eugenic is because for me, I define eugenics in terms of 2 things. One, a policy that operates at the level of the population, where civil servants or clinicians or whatever say, this is the sort of baby we should have as a population. We should not have feeble-minded babies. We should not have the babies of unmarried mothers. We should not have the babies of minority ethnic groups or whatever. This is our policy as a polity. And we did have that. We had that in the United States, in the Scandinavian countries, in Germany, in Austria, in France, in many, many countries of this world. And not only was it a population-level policy to control equality, the racial hygiene, the population science, but it was also coercive. So we had laws in Indiana in 1911 and then in 17 other United States. We had laws in all of those countries I mentioned to mandate the sterilization of so-called feeble-minded people and others. And we know the excesses and the crimes to which that led. But I think that we can differentiate our current approach. I hope we can. We fight tooth and nail to assert that we can. Because it's an individual choice. It's a clinical, individual choice of a woman and possibly her partner, supported by the clinicians, with full information and no coercion. And I uphold that informed consent as our standard. Now, again, we could talk for some time about the ways in which that free and fully informed consent is undermined in practice. It's undermined by the inadequacy of the information we provide. It's undermined by the sometimes non-directive attitudes of the clinicians whom we encounter. And it's undermined also by something more subtle. The fact that the screening and termination testing in pregnancy is a conveyor belt. It is routinized. It's what Barbara Katz-Rothman has labeled the tentative pregnancy. So we live in an era where the informed choice, the opt-in choice, the considered choice is rendered less real because it's just part of a pattern of tests which we possibly don't even know what they're for. In the United Kingdom, every single pregnancy is tested for syphilis. Now, if you said that to any pregnant woman in the UK, vast majority of them would say, what? I was tested for syphilis? So yeah, you consented to that. I consented to that? Yeah, you had bloods taken, and that was partly for syphilis testing. The point I'm making is when it gets routinized and conveyor belt develops, where each decision predetermines the next decision. I think I've got a few minutes. I can go on to this. Right. So do you want testing screening? What screening? Well, it's a blood draw. Serum testing. What does that find out? Well, it just finds out if you're at greater risk. OK. Does everybody do this? Yeah, everybody does. All right. Blood test. I'm trivializing this. I don't want to be disrespectful, but I'm exaggerating. So we have the blood test. Blood test comes back positive. The blood test is positive. What does that mean? Well, that's bad. Positive is bad. You're at raised risk for your age and circumstances of having a fetus affected by Down syndrome. Oh, OK. So what should I do? Well, the only point of having the screening test was to find out if you should have a diagnostic test. Really? Yeah, that's the only thing to do. And if you didn't want to have a diagnostic test, you shouldn't have bothered with a screening test, because that's all it tells you should have. OK. So does most people have that? Yeah, they do. OK, I'll have that. So you have the amnio with a 1% chance of losing your pregnancy. Very significant. That's about equivalent to the chance of having an infant with Down syndrome, pregnancy affected by Down syndrome. And it comes back positive, which is negative. And it says you're carrying a pregnancy affected by Down syndrome. Oh. What do I do now? Well, the only thing to do, as opposed to not to do, is to terminate pregnancy. That's all the thing you can do. Otherwise, it's just for knowledge, and yeah, you know, and you can prepare. But if you want to act, then this is what you do. Oh. Now, my point is that the lady at this end here, who had the serum test, did not anticipate, in many cases, being here, because the risk was small. The choice presented was trivial. But here it's a profound, life-changing choice, which she will have to live with for the rest of her days, for good or ill, to continue or not to continue. It's still a burden. And I'm making a point that the routinization, and in the UK, the lack of real counseling as to whether you want to go down that route, each step predetermines the next. And that routinization makes our notion of informed consent far more contested. And I'm not saying this is bad. I'm saying that we need to have more eyes open. We'd have better counseling, better information, so that women can say, I don't want to go down that route. And we say, that's fine. You don't have to. You don't need to take that responsibility on yourself. Because if you speak to women of our age or older, they'll say, thank God I didn't have to make those choices. If you go out and straw poll ladies or 60 or whatever and say, what do you think about what the choices are now currently offered? They will say, as a woman, thank God I didn't have to make those choices because I don't know what I'd have done. I really don't know what I'd have done. That's the most common response I hear. So I'm just trying to complicate that. I support it, but I'm troubled by it, and I want to complicate it. But I don't think it's eugenic. I think some people have said, Philip Kitcher says it's laissez-faire eugenics, and other people have said, I've said it, maybe eugenics is an emergent property. But the issue is that we look at a particular system, the UK system, the US system, the French system, the Danish system, and we interrogate it as to those features that I've enumerated, and probably others that you can offer me. So what do we do at the moment? I've really characterized it by my little pantomime just now. We offer all women serum screening. Not a certain age, all women have serum screening. And serum screening is about the markers which tell you about your raised risk. That's all. It is screening. We offer all women ultrasound. Women consider this and their partners as the first photograph of the baby in their album. But we're not charitable. We have a health system constrained by expense. And the reason we do this is to look for anomalies. It's an anomaly scan at 18 weeks. Is everything there? Is the fetus all right? And the nuchal translucency, the measurement of the back of the neck of the fetus, coupled with the markers that we've found in the serum screen, show whether there is a higher raised relative risk of Down syndrome or indeed spina bifida, and therefore where we should have a diagnostic test, which comes at 18 weeks, the amniocentesis, and the offer of termination of pregnancy. And in the UK, 90% or more of couples that get to that point terminate the pregnancy. That is what couples do. And so that's the reality we have to deal with. So that's screening of all ladies and their partners. We also have testing. Because screening and testing, as you'll know, are different. Screening is about your raised risk. Testing is a diagnostic, definitive answer. So we don't test everybody. People think that we have this genetic screening of find and search and destroy and everything. It's not. So it's for family history people with a family history of Huntington's disease, hemophilia, Duchenne, cystic fibrosis, these common rare disorders. 1 in 125,000 in cystic fibrosis and a Caucasian population. Or if it's a minority group like Cypriot people or sub-Saharan African people or Jewish people who have a raised relative risk of, say, Tay-Sachs or thalassemia or sickle cell anemia. Now, these are couples and families who know probably about the disease. So my worries about informed consent are perhaps less here because they're more individualized counseling. These are rarer circumstances, and there is a better family knowledge and a community knowledge. In the Jewish community, there's Dor Yeshorim. In all these communities, there's an understanding. Now we have the possibility of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis for those couples who don't want to terminate an affected pregnancy, but still want to select an embryo. Now, this is of a minority. This is a rare thing indeed. A few hundred babies a year at maximum are born this route. So that's where we are now. I'm sorry to spend 20 minutes establishing what you probably already know. But for those that are not familiar with the UK system, it might be interesting to compare with your own system. So what's non-invasive prenatal diagnosis, and why does it change things? Well, this refers, as I'm sure you're aware, to what's called cell-free DNA. So in the mother's blood, there are circulating DNA fragments from the fetus. And this is detectable. So you can look at the plasma and you can say, well, that DNA is from mum, that DNA is from mum, this DNA is from baby. And then you can essentially biopsy, you can test the DNA of the baby for what you're interested in. And what's very interesting about this for me is two things. One, it's early. It's 10 weeks. Compare this to amniocentesis at 18 weeks. So early in pregnancy, first trimester, a time where termination may just happen by a pill, misoprostol and so forth, not a surgical termination. So it's early. It's non-invasive. It's like serum screening. It's just a blood draw. So the bar is lower. There is no risk of fetal loss at all with this, unlike that 1% risk with amniocentesis or chorionic villus sampling, the other technique. Now, at the moment, it's predictive. It's a screening test for Down syndrome. So, for example, the detection rate is 99.2%. That's very, very good, but it's not diagnostic. There's a false positive rate, so in a very, very small number of cases, it says you're carrying a Down syndrome fetus when you're not. But almost always it gets it right. So it's not diagnostic for chromosome abnormalities like trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome, and trisomy 18 and trisomy 13, but it's pretty good. But for sex chromosome anomalies, for rhesus positive status, and for some monogenic conditions, that is, conditions where it's come from the father. So I carry the G2A transposition 0.38 in my FGFR3 gene. If I had a child right now, at 10 weeks with this blood draw, you would be able to tell if the child was affected by achondroplasia. That's new. And I've said WGS technically possible. WGS stands for whole genome sequencing. I'll leave that with you. There's a point, significant but minor point. It can also reveal whether the lady has a cancer at the moment. So why is this interesting? Well, for the clinicians, it's the holy grail. It's early. It's cheap. It avoids the pregnancy loss risk of amniocentesis. It's reassuring. It's not painful. It reduces healthcare costs. The early abortion is safer, cheaper, less traumatic. What's not to like? This is brilliant in terms of screening. Really, really wonderful. So look at that Canadian study. So instead of 10,000 amniocentesis, it reduces to 300. Instead of 70 miscarriages as a result of the procedure, 1. 69 ladies who do not lose their pregnancy. It's phenomenal and all cheaper. So in the UK screening committee has just backed this. We're going to do it. And look at the headlines in the Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the BBC News. The message is marvelous. And so it is for all those reasons. Because they did the math, and if you have a risk of more than 1 in 150 of having a pregnancy affected by Down syndrome, it's cost effective. Nearly 5,000 fewer invasive tests per year, 25 fewer miscarriages a year, more Down syndrome detected, and it costs less. You can see why the men in Whitehall are so excited. This is it is the holy grail. You could offer it to everybody. That would cost a lot more and not do much good. But if you offer it to high-risk pregnancies, you're home and dry. So we're here to discuss not the maths, not the money, not the clinical benefits even, really. We're here to discuss, I think, the ethics. And so I just want to say a couple of things about this. There is an argument that the fact that the previous tests were invasive was good. It set a hurdle. You're not just going with it. You're going, OK, hold on a minute. How much do I care about this? Do I really want to go with this? Why would I do? What would I do? It's pushing you to make those choices. If it's non-invasive, if it's it has no risk of miscarriage, well, yeah, of course you have it. It becomes like the syphilis test. Of course, what? Did I? OK. You just do it. So it's routinized. Now, it's earlier in pregnancy. Now, I'm a gradualist, so I think this is great. If people are going to have a termination, I would far rather they had it early, far rather, and simpler and easier and cheaper and less traumatic and all the rest of it. For some people, they actually continue, and that's good too. They've got the information, they've got the knowledge. For others, it's reassurance. But is this further routinization? It is further routinization. So how easy is it to say no to this now? Previously, you could say no, and you could say, I don't want the risk of miscarriage. Now, why would you say no? Unless you had that very serious objection to abortion or objection to selective abortion. Otherwise, why would you say no? So it makes it much harder for couples to opt out because it's so obvious. It's a no-brainer. And I think this is important. It makes it more routine. I think that we will have a stigmatization of those who choose not to do it. And when, if they, in some cases, rare cases, they have a baby affected by Down syndrome, we'll be asking the question, well, why did you not avoid that? It was so easy. What the hell were you thinking of? Oh, we've got to pay for the education of young Charlie, who you could have avoided? I'm not sure that's right. Now, that would be a cruel and senseless, inhuman, and unchristian response. But we live in the era of, what's he called? Donald Trump? We live in the era of populists of left and right and austerity. So I don't think I'm being sensational when I say that people might well say, wait. And I'm talking about the UK. We have a national health system. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think you don't. I think you have an insurance-based system. And insurance, they're trying to save money. And so I don't know if they cover you if you don't have the test. I don't know. And we also have this inequality of access. Hopefully in the National Health Service, it will be available to everybody. But possibly in other jurisdictions, you are going to have some people who are knowledgeable about a test, which is actually a little bit confusing. It's new to people, who go, I want that new test. I want that for my pregnancy. And other people who say, I'll tell you what's given. I'm going to pay a bit more. No, I'm not going to pay more. Or whatever. Maybe I'm caricaturing that. But I think there will be the possibility of inequalities of access. So even though it appears to be the Holy Grail, I think we should have some concerns. On balance, I think we should do it. But I think we should be careful. I also think that we should look to the future. Because I put in those 3 little initials, whole genome sequencing. Now, at the moment, we have the use of NIPT for sex selection. Well, I think that should make us sit up and worry. You may not wish to have a late abortion for sex, but you might be thinking, well, misoprostol, I've got 3 girls, I want a boy. You might be thinking, my culture says I should have a boy first, misoprostol. We might have concerns about that. We certainly condemn it in other parts of the world, so we might have some concerns. Oh, look, carriers. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? There are people out there who are carriers for muscular dystrophy. Well, would we continue that? I'm not sure. Well, it's early, it's trivial. Let's take the pill. Whole genome sequencing. Now, remind me what that means. Does that mean that you're going to potentially in future check for a lot of things? Not just clinical things, not just Down syndrome, but maybe later onset things like breast cancer or dementia. I have 2 ApoE3 genes. Yo! My risk of dementia is pretty average. But some of you folks have got an ApoE4 gene or 2. You've got a much higher chance. I've forgotten the ratio, much higher chance. Maybe it would be better not to have a fetus with those. Now, there are some risk-taking alleles. They're sort of associated with risk, I think. Some people have said XQ28. I think it's dodgy, but the gay gene, I know we're putting that in inverted commas, but there certainly are genes that affect behavior. MAOI, that's associated, I think, with antisocial behavior. In the context of other traumas that you might have experienced, you might go that route. So do you see what I'm saying here? That when you have an early, non-invasive, no risk of miscarriage screening tool, which at the moment is used in a very small number of cases, but could be combined with the whole genome sequencing or the panel testing, which can reveal a whole lot more, we're taking it out of the realm of disability. This is not a disability problem. And that's why I said it's the canary in the coal mine. This is a people problem. This is a population problem. This is a what sort of people do we want to have in the world problem, which goes way beyond Down syndrome. Down syndrome, forget. We're talking about you. We're talking about the shy person, the celiac or whatever. We're talking back to Barbara Katz-Rothman, tentative pregnancy. And we have accepted, I've accepted up to this point. I've got some questions to answer. I've accepted the ethical standard of informed consent. And I know there's people out there who do a whole lot of stuff to improve the quality of their offspring. They pay a lot of money to send them to Harvard, for starters, and whatever schools people went to prior to coming here, and the extra French and whatever. Wouldn't it make a lot more sense to do this beforehand? Maybe you wouldn't even need to bother with Harvard. Maybe you could go to Yale, and because you'd have chosen the right fetus in the first place. Now, I'm exaggerating. But I'm exaggerating without, and I'm trivializing, and I'm probably offending a few of you. But there is something true here. Not yet, but there is something true here. Now, in the UK, the test costs £250 at the moment, which is nothing. And for this sort of wider testing, it would cost a lot more. But in the low thousands of dollars at the moment. You can get a $1,000 genome. I did the spit test for 23andMe. Have you done that? You don't get the information we get. That's how I know that I've got 2 ApoE3s, because the feds don't let you find that out, but we can find that out. I could show you. I should have put it on the slide, but I could show you all these alleles that I know about. Point I'm making is consumer testing is so easy now and so available. And this is just this in pregnancy, early, non-invasive. So to wind up. It makes it easier, quicker, and less morally problematic for Down syndrome. But it also lowers the bar more generally, I think. Maybe not now. And if there are clinicians in the audience, they're saying, Tom, you're exaggerating. But I would say to you, yeah, it's not quite possible now, although whole genome sequencing is possible. But it's not quite possible now. But it will be. Can you tell me it won't be in a wee while? And so I wasn't bothered about choosing on the characteristics of the fetus at the top of the program, but maybe I should have been. Maybe this new situation should lead me to reconsider what I was thinking at the top of the program. Maybe not. I'm not sure. I really don't know. Or maybe I'm still disinterested. Maybe I still think it's an individual decision, and the lady and the man can do whatever they want. As long as they get informed consent, they're allowed to make the decision that's good for them, and they're left to it. But if that was the case, in a world where we are sexist, we are racist, we are homophobic, and we are deeply, deeply elitist, then we might have a problem. Thank you very much. And I would really welcome your thoughts, challenges, questions, and solutions.
I think this is so fascinating. I do study the FDA here in the U.S., so I'm familiar with that point you made about them. But in the U.K., you have an agency that oversees reproductive biology and technologies, and we don't have an analog here. In your view, do they have a role to play, or can and should they have a role to play in these kinds of technologies?
I think you're referring to the Human Fertilization Embryology Authority, which I think is a model regulator. It's a very, very good regulator, and it's cautious and it's careful. But it doesn't have jurisdiction over this. It has jurisdiction over pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. But really, that's a sideshow. That is so not very common. It's getting a bit more successful. But yeah, it was developed, as you know, back in 1990, and it's not ubiquitous. The analogy my geneticist colleague makes is, look, we can put a person on the moon. We can do that now. But are we going to the moon every week? No. So even though a technology is possible, it doesn't mean that it's going to be widespread adopted. And I think with all of these technologies, that's one analogy we make. And the other analogy is with the computer. And in the early days of the computer, somebody said, oh, we're only going to need a couple of these. And now, as we know, we have more power in our pocket than sent people to the moon. So are these technologies the computer or the moonshot? And I think that with PGD, it's the moonshot. But with this one, I think it's the computer. And it's not regulated by the HFEA. The HFEA is very interesting. I think it's a very sincere, a very good body. But actually, it has enabled Britain to progress further than almost any other nation in terms of reproductive biology. It enabled the mitochondrial donation, which is germline manipulation, according to many people. And we were enabled to do that because we could say, look, we have a body. We regulate it. It's OK, folks. You don't need to worry. This is a very good group of people. And if they say it's OK, it's OK. Now, that might be fantastic. That may mean that we get the benefits of this technology. But and they mean that we go slower. And we don't discredit it by suddenly going, hey, we're going to clone Donald. But that also enables it to advance. And that's how it was designed, realistically. It's a very clever regulatory, not a fig leaf, but although it appears illiberal, it's profoundly liberal and rational and evidence-based. And I applaud that, but I also worry that not individual decisions are wrong, but maybe our direction of travel is wrong. And that's what I'm trying to hint at this paper. Yes, in the middle, sorry. Yeah, you.
Yes, thanks so much, Tom. That was really fascinating. And you started off talking about a woman's right to choose, essentially based on an economic decision. And of course, we factor economic decisions into everything we do, whether she might have a disabled child or a non-disabled child. And then, sort of by the end of your talk, we were essentially sort of thinking ourselves whether within a society with pre-existing sort of structural prejudices and inequalities and differences in pay scales, etc., we would all sort of choose a scenario in which our offspring were tall, white, male, heterosexual, essentially the faculty of the Canaries School, or indeed the British Cabinet at the moment. So it seems to me that between that sort of direction of travel, there was actually no difference in terms of ethical principle. And the challenge that I suppose I'd come back at you on is your suggestion that this isn't eugenics, because it's not at a population-wide level or even a sort of state-sanctioned level. And it just seems to me that if we're making economic-based decisions on whether our child is going to be A, a high earner, or B, a high cost, we are making those decisions from an ideology of unregulated capitalism, which is essentially the invisible hand, which is the demographic force, is the sort of population control. And it seems to me that it's the responsibility of governments to regulate that. And so it seems to me that in this particular case, to prevent the nightmare scenario which that you chart, it would be the responsibility of a responsible government to regulate the economic eugenics which is built into our financial structure.
Yeah, I take your point. I mean, I think I think it's a very, very difficult decision for people who take it seriously, the current decisions. So I don't think they're just being economic. I think they're making decisions about what they consider to be the good life. I do think they're being the bioethicist that Raina Rapp suggested they were being. They're thinking, well, will this child suffer? Will this child have limited life opportunities? And so forth. So I think that we can make arguments in society and culture about what it is to have disability, about, I and you and others put forward the evidence repeatedly that the quality of life of disabled people is equal to or better than non-disabled people. There are, look at Albrecht and de Vliege in 1999 and many other papers which show this data. So, and indeed the role models of disabled people who achieve great things and all the rest of it. So I think that it's the argument we are waging is what constitutes a good life. And I think that this situation we currently come to offers us a way in. Because we all have 100 mutations in our genome, every one of us. We all carry 4 or 5 recessive conditions which, in combination with a similarly genomed partner, might result in a disabled child with an inherited disability. So this is about all of us and what we consider. I was joking about my APOE, but it's about asserting the importance of diversity within human experience. Not saying it's fine to suffer and we were wrong to prevent the birth of a fetus affected by Tay-Sachs disease. diversity doesn't extend to saying, well, look, we should never have eliminated smallpox. That was part of. I don't think that the biodiversity argument holds up very well. But I do think there is something, not as a strong claim, but as a weak claim, I think it holds up very well. Because, and we can illustrate this through history and through contemporary culture, we do all bring different things to the party, and we do need different people at different times. And amongst those are disabled people who bring hugely. And I love the work of Eva Feta-Kite and lots of others who've asserted the value of disabled lives. And we all continue, you and I and others, to do that. But we're waging a sort of huge cultural war here against the idea that only if you are a well-paid Harvard Law School commercial lawyer with beautiful nipped and tucked features do you count for anything. But I think it's a war that I'm looking forward to fighting. So bring it on. Please.
Thank you. This is really brilliant. My question, I guess, folds a little on the last two questions. And since some of the technology you described or new scientific instruments are inevitable, where should the counseling or interventions or raising of the issues you talked about occur? Which sites, which many sites? In other words, as you're describing the UK regulator, you said, well, in some ways it's liberating, in some ways not. Is this something, how would you, beyond your own writing, advocate advancing more self-awareness about what's at stake? And going to the last question, I think part of its implication was that implicitly, if not explicitly, by the values of the larger society, we're already making certain choices.
Well, I think high school. I think it's about awareness of and attitudes to disabled people as part of the diversity of the population in high school and beyond. And it's about confronting the fears we have. We are all terrified. We are terrified of disability. We're terrified of it in ourselves, and we're terrified of it in our children. We don't know how to talk to disabled people. What do I say to the disabled person at parties? You can do it. Presumably that comedy sketch has already been done. But I think it's a conversation that we need to have as a society. And what's wonderful is that we are having disabled people coming through who are more than capable of leading that conversation, and who could stand or sit up there and say, yeah, look at my life. Look at what I've achieved. And those people are not in my generation, which are full of hoary, bitter, old, twisted activists, as Michael will tell you, but in our children's generation. My children are 27 and 28, and one's a social worker, and one regulates the British banking industry, and they're both disabled, and they just take it for granted. And I'm hoping there will be many more people like them who've had the benefit of an education, who can advocate for themselves, and who can be in the media to say, look, you know what? We can get on with this. In the same way that in British society we now consider gay people and lesbian people. We don't have a problem with that anymore. So we can transform social attitudes. And given what you say, that the technology is pretty much inevitable, that's all we can do. We live in a very individualist world. We can't stop people using most of this stuff. We can have the HFEA, we can limit it, we can restrict it a little bit. But broadly, we can't stop it. Therefore, all we can do is to say, look, you don't have to go down that way. We can have a broader, more diverse world, and it'll be better for it, not worse. I don't know what else we can do, but yeah, start young. Please.
So you partially, I guess my question was preempted by the gentleman question, but I'd like to ask you from the opposite side. First of all, thank you so much. It's amazing how open-minded you are about the whole thing. But at some point, you do draw the line where it becomes eugenics, I assume.
Yeah.
I'd be curious for somebody who's been thinking about it, basically, probably most of his life, if not entire life, where do you actually draw that line? So if you do the test and you find out that the child is disabled, it sounds like it's okay with you. If you do the test and you find out that you, for whatever reason, choose to have a different gender, it seemed like you were saying that it was still okay with you. But where do you actually draw the line and feel it becomes eugenic?
I mean, as I said, for me, eugenic is where your culture or your society are pushing you to a particular outcome. That's what I worry about. So it's not about the individual decisions. It's about whether you are channeled to make those decisions, whether you have options for not making that decision.
So as long as you have an option to make that decision and don't feel pushed by society,
yes.
It's your individual decision.
Yes.
For whatever reason, if I only want to have blonde children and
Yeah.
I don't want to have dark-haired children, you would not consider it eugenics.
No, because individuals have all sorts of quirky thoughts. What I'm worried about is where society as a whole is saying, have the blonde children, have the blonde children. And you know what? If you have the dark-haired children, you know, we're going to laugh at those ones. So, you know, so it's like some people have defended, and I'm not sure I do defend it, but some people have defended sex selection in a Western context and called it family balancing. And they said, what could be wrong if a family has got 2 boys and they really want a girl and they choose to have a girl? Because it won't change the gender dynamic in society at large. I'm not sure about that, but certainly it has some merit as an argument. That is different from a society where you say, we will systematically devalue girl babies, and we will systematically, through our culture, make it problematic for you to have a girl baby with a dowry system. And we will systematically, through our religion, say if you don't have a boy baby to light your pyre, your funeral pyre, you're not really a full member of our culture. So that is different from the individual who says, you know what, I've got 3 boys, I only going to have 1 more pregnancy, and I'd really like to have a girl this time. That, for me, is morally, you know, I'm not going to lose sleep over that. It's about the society messages and about the extent to which society says to you, that's fine. Continue. If you want to continue your pregnancy affected by Down syndrome, that's fine. We have really good heart surgery. We can deal with the gastric issues. We can have inclusive education. We will support your child through school, and we will enable your child to make the best of their talents and flourish. You know, I am open-minded, but I want society to be open-minded. And not to think of the costs, but to think of the benefits and the opportunities that diversity brings.
So it sounds like since you can't regulate, once a child is born, you can't regulate society not to laugh at it. I mean, you can't have a law saying it's illegal to laugh.
No. But you can have a law which says you have the right to inclusive education. And what you find is that when a child is educated alongside a black child, an Asian child, a disabled child, a gay child, pretty soon they don't even take any notice. I remember giving a talk to a school, and in the middle of the talk, they were all sitting here. In the middle of the talk, one guy stands up. And I think, oh, he's going to ask a question. No. He's going to start screaming. No. And I was a bit freaked out by this lad standing up. Nobody else in the room batted an eyelid. This was a child who was neurodiverse, and he did that from time to time. But they were used to him, and he was fine. They weren't frightened, they weren't scared, and they didn't stare. And that's the model of an inclusive classroom, where, you know, if your friend is transgender, who gives a monkeys? Everybody's different. And similarly, if your child is Down syndrome or blonde-haired or whatever it might be, that's OK. So that's why I think it starts in high school, because that's where we learn what society is and who is in it. And we've had shockingly homophobic classrooms historically, and bullying and suicide and dreadfulness for lesbian, gay, and transgender children. But we are slowly moving away from that. And we could and should move away from that in terms of blindness or Down syndrome or whatever else. And those messages will be remembered, I think. That's my hope. And I don't know what else I can say. I don't know what, you know, I would love to, you know, have a better solution, but I'm not sure I do.
So correct me if I'm wrong, the only way to regulate society is by having laws.
No, I'm a sociologist. I don't accept that at all. You can have all sorts of things. You know, for example, interpersonal violence. You know, you can make it illegal, of course you can, but you can have programs for intimate partner violence which are proven to reduce domestic violence. You can have parenting programs. You can have all sorts of I mean, law works not just through law. You know, you can regulate with, you know, all sorts of soft regulation. You know, you can't tell advertisers what images to use, but you do have educational materials, and you do have all sorts of ways of intervening. Surely, it can't be just the law. Otherwise, we would live in a very much less civilized society than we do. I don't think there's any law which says that I can't spit on the floor when I pass Michael, but there are standards of decency and respect which would mean that you would all think, what a scumbag at me, Michael.
I'll get in line. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the tensions and maybe even contradictions in some of the disability rights rhetoric around this, because it makes for very odd political bedfellows about control of body, control of choice.
I mean, I don't know so much about the US, but in the UK, disability rights activists are often getting in bed with very traditional reactionary religious forces, which I think is really problematic. And I think that often in disability advocacy talk, we haven't thought through our positions consistently. And for me, as I'll say later today, disability is, the disability movement has said we are disabled by society, not by our bodies. And they've made a big play of the social barriers and social relations, social attitudes which construct disability, and rightly so. But I also think that there is a bodily disadvantage for many of us, and in some cases a very extreme disadvantage. That's part of disability. Disability is a medical matter, it's a psychological matter, it's a social matter, and it's a legal matter. It's all of those at the same time. And if we don't have that richness of understanding of disability, then we're going to risk failing to do justice to the complexity of the issue. So in this area of bioethics and prenatal diagnosis, we are often arguing at cross purposes, because the disability activists said, look, disability is no obstacle to success and flourishing. And they refer to Michael and they refer to other successful disabled people. In other words, disability is on a continuum, and they cherry pick the ones who are doing really well and are not really hindered. And meanwhile, say the geneticist or the eugenicist or whoever it might be says, no, disability renders you pain and suffering and exclusion. And they're cherry picking the worst end of the continuum, where people really do have very miserable, limited lives, and where anybody in their right mind would wish to avoid that at all costs. But it's all disability. Disability is both ends and the middle. It's a continuum. And I think that our analyses have to do justice to the richness of it. And so when we see the CRPD, or we see the ADA, or we see policy on prenatal diagnosis, we need to test it. And we need to test it with, as it were, the most extreme case of limited life resulting from disability, and with the most successful, person who really needs very little, but is going to flourish. And if it works for both of them, then we're on solid ground. But if it's selective and partial, we need to go back and think a bit harder. That's my thinking.
Well, you've educated us, enlivened us, enlightened us, and made for a wonderful, wonderful talk. Please join me in thanking Professor Petrie.
Thank you for coming.